Morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Kevin Lopez once again from Personal Tutors, bringing to you the chapter On the Face of It, written by Susan Hill from 12th Standard Vistas book. My friend, we at Personal Tutors are constantly picking up the pace and creating the online ventures, the briefs for your references, so that you may just go ahead and get the details and the references, the short references of the chapter, beautifully explained by me just for the sake of you guys. So I would request you to subscribe our channel for more details and updates every day. The story goes here about Mr. Lam, who had once been an armyman, presently a veteran, and Derry, a young child whose face has been burned due to a bottle of acid accidentally falling on him. These are two personalities, diverse, immense, and yes, these personalities are battered by the same spot, that is not an ailment but an impalement. My friends, these both personalities depict two diverse life forms, and it gives us a point to remember about two different individualities trying to cope up with the situations that you're facing. Let's take Mr. Lam now. An army veteran lost his leg due to an explosion in a war, thus having a tin leg attached. Still was called Lammy by the kids around, made fun of. He had a huge garden in his house. People used to come, sit, have fruits, pluck flowers, enjoy in his garden. Yet the old man was never spoken of or spoken to. He was totally ignored by the people around. Thus was left in the singularity of himself reading the books, that all he had, that he explains in the chapter, that I've been living in the lonely house with my books. He explains it very clearly. On the contrary, Derry, a cute little kid, accidentally face got burned due to an acid bottle falling on his face. He despises the eyes and sight of the people around him, because all he gets is sympathy, whereas he needed an empathy. My friend, sympathy is just showing pity, whereas empathy here is actually feeling the pain of the person there and then persuading the person for the best. My friends, the story starts as Derry jumping over the wall of Mr. Lam and getting into his garden, immediately noticing that Mr. Lam is having a view and wanted to run away, whereas Mr. Lam did not react but calmly asked the boy to have an apple. He offered him an apple. The boy was a bit startled here. He wanted to know the reason that Mr. Lam isn't showing any pity towards his face. Then realizing that he and Mr. Lam both face the same brevity and the sanctity and the sadness of people ignoring them due to their looks and the conditions. He comes to know that although Mr. Lam over here has a huge property, nice garden, people come and enjoy, have fruits, do all stuff, yet nobody leaves or lets anyone to have a word with Mr. Lam. They don't care about him as if it does not exist. On the other hand, Derry is despised because of his looks. People just hate looking at his burnt face. That's where, ironically, Derry realizes that they both are facing the same issue. Mr. Lam here speaks to Derry and comes to know about his reason for hiding from the world, and says something to Derry that is peculiarly effective. He says you cannot hide in the cupboard all your life. That means you need to go out and face it. You need to let people know about your work, not about your looks. You shouldn't be worried, you shouldn't be affected by what people think about your looks. It's about your work, it's about your way of attitude, living. That's what will recall you in the later times. This little boy got the words of wisdom, promised Mr. Lam to come back, and ran to his home. Mr. Lam, a person knowing that anybody meeting him for the first time never returns, feels the same for Derry, and he actually speaks out, I know you shall never come back. And he also tries to go ahead and take a ladder and pluck the apples again. So he climbs up the ladder. Whereas Derry here reaches his home, informs his mother about how Mr. Lam had enlightened him by impregnating the beautiful thought of living the life and facing it once again. He was actually scolded by his mother for having been gone to Mr. Lam's residence, upon which the young boy exclaims to her that he speaks to him as a person, not as a piece of pity. He speaks to him whilst giving him the happiness and courage, gaining the strength to live the life and not hiding anymore from the world. Thus, he runs back to Mr. Lam's house. This part of the story really makes me feel a bit low, my friends. The plot opens, Derry bangs the gate open of the garden and screams out, Mr. Lam, I said I would come. And there he found Mr. Lam along with the ladder, fallen down on the ground, dead. The boy shrieks out in a loud cry, and the story abruptly ends over here. It actually leaves us wondering about the notion how people live, how people have lost the harmony. They really have. This story gives us a lesson of facing things and be ready to face it. There is a question over here that asks if we could go ahead and change the end of the story, what we could do. My friends, there are numerous options that we can inform over here or keep, like Derry would have picked Mr. Lam, called his mother, taken him to the hospital, nursed him, got him well again, and had apples. But I personally feel it wouldn't have made an impact this deep with the ending that Susan Hill has beautifully encompassed in the story. Let's have a few question answers. Who is Mr. Lam and how does Derry get into his garden? Mr. Lam is an old man who lived in his mansion, an army man with a lost leg, having a temporary tin leg attached to himself, walking in a lame way, thus being called lamey by the people around. Derry, on the other hand, is a boy who got burnt due to an acid bottle falling on his face, is ashamed of facing people around in the world, thus tries to hide them, and in this process he jumps across the wall of the garden of Mr. Lam and ends up in his garden. Thus, they come to meet each other. This is a play featuring an old man and a small boy meeting in a farmer's garden. The old man strikes up a friendship with the boy, who is very withdrawn and defiant. What is the bond that unites the two? When Derry jumped over Mr. Lamb's garden, he expected somebody to shoo him away due to his looks. Rather than, he was greeted by Mr. Lam by offering an apple. Mr. Lam here is a person who knows the pain of being left alone and is wanting to speak to someone, whereas he is not being greeted or contacted by anybody. On the contrary, Derry here does not want anybody to speak to him or contact him, and he hides from people, creating his own world of loneliness. When Derry comes to know about Mr. Lamb's amputated leg and his physical deformity, he compares it with himself, and thus a bond between two is created. That's what the turning point in the story comes, when Derry gets connected to Mr. Lamb and speaks out that he feels the connect. That's what he says to his mother as well, my friends. Do you think all this will change Derry's attitude towards Mr. Lamb? Mr. Lamb, as said, an army veteran with a lost leg, was despised by people around, ignored totally. Thus, even Derry knew that there lives a person who is not to be spoken about, not to be spoken to. While jumping in his garden and getting a greet from him, Derry realizes that in actuality, Mr. Lamb isn't the person that he is revered to be. He is a plight of loneliness, thus wanting somebody to speak to. That's what changes Derry's attitude towards Mr. Lamb. He also respects him by the way he encompasses courage and bravery to face the world in the little boy. What is it that draws Derry towards Mr. Lamb in spite of himself? Derry noticed that, like him, the old man is a lonely old fellow who is left alone by the world, not to be wanted anymore, resembling himself in the society. That's where the condition arises where Derry is pulled towards Mr. Lamb, in addition to his wise words that encourage him not to run away but to face the reality, the crude reality of him having a bad face. A few words affect him, and thus he leans more towards Mr. Lamb. In which section of the play does Mr. Lamb display signs of loneliness and disappointment? Mr. Lamb uses words as "in my lonely house, I'm left alone with my books." A lonely house clearly depicts that Mr. Lamb did not consider it a home. A home is what a family makes, whereas a house is a dwelling where a person shelters himself from the harshness of the nature. The words that intensify his loneliness are, "I know that the bees sing, they don't buzz." Mr. Lamb has been a lonely fellow for so long that he even has recollected the songs of the bees that usually natural people refer to as buzzing of the bees. The actual pain or inconvenience caused by a physical impalement is often much less than the sense of alienation felt by the person with disabilities. What is the kind of behavior that the person expects from others? This question has got a depth. The actual pain of impalement is nothing in comparison to the alienation of the person from the society. My friends, it happens usually. There are numerous cases of acid attacks in our country today. Those girls are left in hostility. They are left in a negativity, not wanted by anyone, hated by all. That's what creates a sort of feeling of alienation, that means being left alone by the person who has suffered that. Let's think over it. It does not make a positive impact on anyone. May the person be courageous enough to get ready for the physical deformity for all his life, yet if the person is discouraged and left alone by people, that pain cannot be subsided, my friends. I've given you even briefs, so you can create an answer of your own on this as well. Will Derry get back to his old seclusion, or will Mr. Lam's brief association affect a change in the kind of life he will lead in the future? Derry, a boy who was afraid and scared of the society, people looking at him in unwanted attitude with a pity in their eyes, had always been hiding from people. Yet, the brief encounter with the old man Mr. Lam left him with a feeling of uniqueness, left him with a feeling of fighting against the culture, the society that considers him an unwanted kid. His looks were despised by people around, yet he got a feeling of joy and strength that Mr. Lam, in a brief discussion, had given him. Derry would definitely grow out to be a strong man, would turn out to be a confident person, much more confident that he is today, and may end up at a good position in his life. Use your imagination to suggest another ending of the above story. Now, as I said, I've explained this question earlier. Another ending to this story could have been Terry coming to Mr. Lam, getting him hospitalized, getting him taken care of, nursed by his mother, ending up reading books to him, thus changing the scenario of the story. Whence, as I say, the effect of the story by Susan Hill would not have been so tormenting that it torments us now. So these were the few question and answers of the chapter from 12th standard Vistas, On the Face of It. We have gone ahead and completed standard 11th snapshot book for you, standard 10th English literature book for you, and now we are coming up with the standard 12th Vistas as well, my friends. If you want to know something about us, please click the button about us. I request you to subscribe our channel for more information. Also, if you want to have data online, we would provide it online to you as well as in pen drives. So thanking you once again today. Thanks you very much.